you, Chair. I checked. We need. There's the media. I think the media is waiting for approval.
Oh, sorry, didn't even see you there.
No, it's all
right.
right.
How are you, Colin?
Busy?
Yeah, everyone. Yeah, all good. Everyone, I was just saying I should go that way. All good with the media. All good to go. Thanks, Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I just wanted to go to the annual report and the accounting elements of that to start with. The annual report does show a $48.1 million budget deficit, and that's before depreciation and some repayments of leased assets. This is, I think, I'm advised, the second year in a row there's been a deficit, but this deficit is 3 times the size of last year's. Can you take me through why there's seemingly such a large deficit in the accounts for the department?
Yes, so I'll ask our Chief Finance Officer, Charles Jordanowski, to speak to that. The adjusted loss after adjustments for depreciation and amortisation is $28 million. Of that, $13.9 million is a write-down and impairment of assets, and the residual $12.8 million relates to investments we have made in the consolidation and uplift of our information technology within the department. In the usual way, we for when departments are anticipating a loss, we budgeted for that loss and sought approval through our minister from the finance minister for a loss of $22.9 million. So this was flagged ahead of time and was a planned loss insofar as it related to cash. So I'll ask our Chief Finance Officer to give you more detail on that, Senator.
Thank you, Secretary, and thank you, Senator. Charles Jordanowski, Chief Financial Officer. So in answering your question, and as the Secretary has mentioned, our reported deficit, so that's on page 166 of our financial statement, so in our Statement of Comprehensive Income, that did report a deficit of $48.1 million, as the Secretary mentioned. However, when you kind of take into account adjusting for accounting adjustments such as depreciation, amortisation, lease payments under the Australian accounting standards of AASB 16 leases, that does provide an adjusted loss of $28 million, and that is specified on page, let me just find that for you, 221 of our annual report. So that's our net cash appropriation arrangements. So that does show a net cash appropriation of $28 million in deficit. As the Secretary mentioned, the reason for the increase was in 22-23 the department did finalise the much-needed critical IT consolidations post the 2019-20 MOG. So that did then cost quite a significant amount of money for the department that we had to draw down in cash reserves to fund that loss. And we also did have a significant increase in write-off of intangible assets as a result of a finding that we had from the previous year from the Australian National Audit Office. So that did increase the write-off of $13.9 million. So there are the reasons for the increase, as I mentioned, was the long-delayed IT consolidation from the 1920 MOG and the significant write-offs that related to the write-off intangible assets from the A&O audit.
Can I just take you to page 25 of your annual report? I'm sure you've got that in front of you. And I understand the point you're making about investment in longer-term assets, but I'm just interested in how and why it's gone from the surplus deficit attributable to the Australian government has gone from $15 million deficit to $48 million deficit. And when I look at the rows above that figure to get to those figures, at about the middle of the page there, it seems to me the only significant change in expenses is the employee and supplier expenses. They went up quite a substantial amount, by nearly $50 million, so well over 10%. Whereas everything else stayed the same. Obviously got a bit more revenue from the government to help offset that. But what was the reason for such a large change in employee expenses? Because there's obviously other factors that go after the surplus or deficit, but there has been a quite significant change in employee expenses that hasn't been covered or mentioned yet.
Yeah, so thank you, Senator. There was an increase in ASL over that period and associated costs for employee entitlements and employee provisions, and that is why you can see that increase of around $50 million in employee costs. So that's what is main driver, as you mentioned. So that's employee and supplier expenses. In addition to the breakdown exactly of those supplier expenses, I can take that detail on notice if you'd like that. But certainly the big driver is the increase in employee costs and associated provisions for those increases in ASL.
So what are those people doing? This is a substantial increase in taxpayer expenses. What are those extra people doing in the department to provide better infrastructure to Australians?
So there was an increase, and this goes back to the 23-24 budget, and unfortunately my papers don't have the exact breakdown of that detail unless I can find it. Someone from my team might be able to find that. Certainly there was, from memory, and I don't want to quote the wrong number, there was an increase in ASL in the 23-24 budget, which obviously the financials pertain to. So that would be one of the drivers, and that would have been in relation to measures and decisions of government at the 23-24 budget back in May last year.
I'm just still trying. I mean, that's when it happened. I was asking what those people are doing. I suppose it's probably more of a question to the Secretary, but what are those? What are we getting extra for an extra $50 million a year in costs?
I'll try and source the information as to the budget measures in the budget before last so that we can give you an accurate breakdown on that. Obviously, we would have covered that off at Senate estimates at the time.
But I'm just... I mean, if you're at the head of the organisation, if you've got an organisation that's had its employee expenses grow by more than 10% in 1 year, I would have thought you'd be across the detail on what those people are doing. Not independent of any particular measures or announcements a year and a half ago. You know, what are these extra people doing that's making life better for Australians?
Okay, so I'll give you a description of some of the key activities which the department has undertaken over that 12-month period, some of which would have been subject to supplementary funding in the budget before last, which is the budget that you're currently asking me questions about. So that would include things like the aviation white paper, which is a major piece of policy generation which has been undertaken by the Australian government and was published earlier this year. You'll be familiar with the establishment of the net zero unit within the department, relatively modest expenditure, but the production of the infrastructure and transport decarbonisation roadmap, the new vehicle efficiency scheme, which is a major piece of policy. There's also, of course, across the wider department, significant policy activity in the arts sector and in media reform, online safety. So a range of different measures, and we're happy to give you the detail of that. I don't have it at my fingertips because it doesn't relate to the budget to which this Senate estimates relates.
The aviation white paper, though, that predated the budget last year, didn't it? It started before that, didn't it?
I'll have to check that. As I say, you're asking me questions about the budget, which isn't the one that we're here to talk about today. Okay. Still a substantial increase. I mean, I just struggle. I mean, from my perspective as a significant user of our nation's roads, things are getting much worse. Like, our roads are just terrible, horrible at the moment, unsafe. You feel worried driving them at night. I do. My family back from Brisbane to Rockhampton. I don't understand what's going on, what's happened to our road system. And we're spending $50 million more on the department that's responsible for that, but our roads are getting worse. I mean, how do you measure the KPIs of these? Because, I mean, I don't know what a new vehicle efficiency scheme does for me or a net zero does for me. I just want to get my family home safe. And why aren't I able to do that right now? So many people have died on the Bruce Highway. So under the infrastructure outcome, which we'll be talking about next, we'll be able to talk to you about the $120 billion plus investment program going into land transport in this country, including significant investments in the quality, resilience and operation of our road network.
Okay, yeah, we will definitely be taking that up. Well, just moving to these performance targets, the annual report says only 2/3 of the performance targets are being met. Which performance targets were not met in full?
Thank you, Senator. Let me just find that for you. So, just give me 1 minute. Sorry, Senator, if you can just give me 1 sec.
is Michelle Mann, Acting Assistant Secretary. In the annual report, give me a second. For this year's annual report, there were 24 that were met. There were 2 that were substantially met, 5 that were partially met, 1 that was not met, and 2 that didn't have targets.
Okay, so which one wasn't met?
Performance measure 21, which was relating to thriving suburbs, was not met.
Okay. So why wasn't that met?
That was not met because it was put on hold while broader government decisions on program delivery were made.
What did the Thriving Suburbs program do or would have done?
We're happy to talk about that under outcome 3 when we'll have the relevant officers here this afternoon.
Okay.
Well, I think Senator Canavan's asking questions about why the KPI wasn't met, which is a relevant question for this particular outcome.
I mean, I am just asking for a general. I would have thought somebody at the table would understand what the Thriving Suburbs program. How much money was under this program? I presume that's a question I can ask the Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you, Senator. In relation to those measures, as the Secretary mentioned, the detail and the delivery of that belongs to the relevant line area, so that's outcome 3. So I can
just
get you that
how much money?
information.
How much money was I don't know if it's been put on hold, but how much money was allocated to the Thriving Suburbs program before it was put on hold? Is it still on hold, by the way?
David McKay, Deputy Secretary. No, Senator, applications are being assessed at present. Thriving Suburbs program is a total $350 million appropriation. It provides community infrastructure in urban areas. It's the geographical counterpart to growing regions. The projects, individual projects, can be worth between $500,000 and $15 million each.
And so how long was this funding put on hold for? I suppose what I'm asking is what was the profile of the funding when you set the KPI to say, we want to deliver the Thriving Suburbs program? What was the profile of the funding? And then obviously it's been put on hold and the KPI wasn't met. So what happened? How did that funding?
I have the funding profile as it is currently, which was $125 million in this financial year, 24-25.
Okay.
210 in 25-26, and 15 million in 26-27.
Right.
I will need the people who'll be here under outcome 3 this afternoon to go to any change in that profile. Okay. I don't have that in front of me.
Has there been any money spent in previous financial years under the program?
No, this is the first round of the program.
The first spending of the money. Okay. All right. So, in terms of, this is a pretty important program, obviously. I'll wait till that come through to go through, but given how much of a housing shortage we're going through as a country, you'd think this would be an important one to get moving. So, when a KPI is not met, what happens then? So, how does that affect performance assessment, or what happens to the processes within the department?
So, Senator Charles-Ornosky, Chief Financial Officer. So the process in which we undertake our annual performance statements, so we have to comply with the audit that's been undertaken by the Australian National Audit Office, which basically goes through all of our performance measures, and as part of that we do set targets, then we go through the process of providing evidence to ensure that the targets are either being met, or if they're not being met, then we provide disclosure in our annual report for why. So in terms of all of that, I think my colleague can find sort of the rationale for why that we've disclosed this. So this is heavily audited by the Australian National Audit Office, and I understand that they're still in the process of finalising their audit report on the annual performance statement process, because that's done across multiple departments across the APS. So I'm unable to kind of talk through their sort of audit findings and their report, but certainly there is a process that we undertake.
And Senator, to be clear on what this performance measure refers to, this goes to your question about the change in the funding profile. There was expenditure anticipated to have occurred within the financial year that this report covers. Because that funding slipped into the following financial year, that performance measure is technically not met.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find out, like when you set a KPI is not met, does that impact on people's bonuses, or what's happened because the KPI has not been met?
No. So in the case of the Thriving Suburbs program, right, the performance measure related to the program being established within agreed timeframes. In order to launch within agreed timeframes, we're required to procure approvals through cabinet processes, including securing approval for the program guidelines. That took longer than anticipated. That was a function of government decision making. That is obviously easily rectified by the fact that the program is now open. However, it wasn't achieved within the time frame that was stipulated in the performance measure.
So there's no consequence for anyone
because
the KPI is not met?
Because the opening of that program is a choice for government, rather than a function of the performance of public servants.
Yeah, but out there in the real world, people that have to sell goods or finalise deals, they don't get paid. Like if they don't do the sale or don't finalise the deal, they don't get paid. Now, quite often it can be for reasons totally out of their control.
Yeah,
completely out of their control, and they just don't get it done, but they don't get their bonus. But so why is it different in the public service? Why?
Because we're required to comply with the PGPA legislation stipulated by the Parliament, including that we need to get relevant approvals through government processes before we can start spending public money.
That doesn't explain my question, because as I say, that you're saying that it's not the fault of I'm not saying it's not the fault of the public servants. Maybe it's not. Maybe there's other factors. I'm just saying everyone else out there has to suffer the swings and roundabouts of real life, and sometimes things don't come off. They don't get a bonus. That's the way it works. But here, I suppose I can ask a more general question. Has there ever been, in your experience, Mr Betts, a few years in now, someone's bonus affected by the failure to meet a KPI?
We don't have performance bonuses.
You don't have anything at all. Why do we set these KPIs then? What's the point of them?
For the purposes of having the conversation we're having, which is to hold government to account.
Okay, all right. I'll leave it there, Chair, and move on. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Senator McKenzie.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, sorry,
Senator
Chair.
McKenzie. I thought you meant you lived that one. Sorry.
Yes,
yeah, no,
Senator McKenzie.
The Prime Minister, these questions are for you. The Prime Minister made changes to the ministerial code when the Labor Party was elected, and his forward says that his ministers will be held to higher standards. Do you agree that the Prime Minister and all ministers are bound by both the code and his signed statement?
Yes.
Do you agree that ministers are required to be held to a higher standard due to their regulatory powers and collective decision making?
Yep.
Yep. When we go to the Prime Minister's ministerial code, section 1.3, part 5, sorry, got my Roman numerals wrong, part 4, I'll quote, ministers must accept the full implications of the principle of ministerial responsibility. They will be required to answer for the consequences of their decisions and actions, and they must ensure that their conduct in office is in fact and in appearance in accordance with this code, and that their conduct in a private capacity upholds the laws of Australia and demonstrates appropriately high standards of personal integrity. Is it your belief that ministers are explicitly bound to uphold this code in both their public and private capacities?
That's my understanding, Senator McKenzie.
I just want to turn to 3.18 under the heading of gifts, page 7 for anyone following along at home. And I'll read, ministers in their official capacity may therefore accept customary official gifts, hospitality, tokens of appreciation and similar formal gestures in accordance with the relevant guidelines, but must not seek or encourage any form of gift in their personal capacity. That's in the Prime Minister's Code of Conduct for his ministers. Minister, have you ever sought or encouraged any gift from an entity that would be considered directly within the sector that this portfolio regulates?
No, Senator McKenzie.
Sorry?
No, Senator McKenzie.
Thank you. Has any other minister within this portfolio sought gifts?
Not to my knowledge.
Have you ever sought or encouraged a gift that benefited you in a personal capacity?
No, Senator Mackenzie.
Why not? Why not?
It's just not the way I operate, Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you. Just thought I'd ask. Has any other minister or assistant minister within this portfolio ever sought or encouraged a gift that benefited them in their personal capacity?
Not to my knowledge.
And do you accept that soliciting a gift in a personal capacity for a private benefit is explicitly prohibited under the Code of Conduct for Ministers?
I don't have the Code of Conduct in front of me, sorry, Senator Mackenzie, but broadly that would be my understanding.
I just read the relevant passages. Why do you think that the Prime Minister and the Ministerial Code of Conduct would make it so explicit that ministers shouldn't be accepting and soliciting gifts?
Obviously, the Prime Minister's been a very experienced parliamentarian. He's been in this place for a long time. I think in coming to government, we saw what went on with our predecessors and the lack of integrity and accountability that applied, and the Australian people wanted to see a higher standard set. That's what the Prime Minister's done, and that's what his ministers are striving to achieve.
So you've got a political answer, but my question goes, why for ministers, in terms of their regulatory functions, would be soliciting a gift be problematic?
Oh, you'd have to put that to PM&C,
Okay.
Senator Mackenzie.
All right, thank you. Do you believe accepting gifts in this portfolio, for ministers within this portfolio, from the aviation sector for a private family holiday breaches the code?
It's not really for me to judge that, Senator Mackenzie.
Okay. I just wanted to read one other section to you, Minister. 3.21. My apologies. I've got my paperwork all. 3.21. Yep. Ministers must not seek or accept any kind of benefit or other valuable consideration either for themselves or for others in connection with performing or not performing any element of their official duties. Do you agree that accepting flights, upgrades or gifts as Minister for Transport for private benefit is a breach of the code?
It's not really for me to judge, Senator Mackenzie.
Why
It'd be
not?
a matter for PM&C.
Matter for PM&C. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. If there are any further questions in corporate matters?
Some more. I just want to go to the staff survey results, or the census, I think it might be called. Is that right? The latest census apparently shows that only 53% of staff feel a strong attachment to my agency. That's apparently 10 percentage points below the APS. Is that something that concerns you, Mr Best, or are there any plans in place to try and improve that?
It doesn't greatly concern me, to be honest, Senator. I look at that finding within the overall census results, 91% response rate and an uptick in terms of our overall staff engagement. I'd point out that, and this was noted in the capability review a year and a half ago, that the department, which has a very long name and lots of functions within it, is a relatively recent creation, dating back to 2020. And there are entities within that department, like the Office of the Arts, like Communications and Media, that have a long tradition of operating within a lot of different machinery of government structures. So, and the department is spread across multiple different buildings in Canberra. So, in a way, that measure of identification with the department is a function of its history. And my view is that, provided the different parts of the department cooperate and collaborate with each other when they need to, and provided staff understand the level of diversity of opportunity that exists within such a broad portfolio, then as long as those different entities are doing their day job, they don't need to be homogenised in terms of their culture. So, no, that subcomponent of what was overall a pretty good census outcome doesn't greatly concern me.
So from what you've said, it would probably follow that the attachment, the measure of the result on this metric should be higher for the central parts of the department, like the Department of Infrastructure and Transport, which is not a creation of 2020, they're around for a long time, and maybe some of those other arms, if you like, have a lower attachment. Do you have a breakdown then of that result for people from the different outcomes, or however way you divide the department?
It's broken down across the different functional areas of the department, but I wouldn't necessarily say that infrastructure is any more central to the department than communications and media. My point is that those functions have relatively recently been conjoined through the machinery of government change.
My point is, of course, the Department of Infrastructure has been something like the Department of Infrastructure and Transport for decades, for generations.
Something like the Office of the Arts and something like Department of Communications as well, you recall.
Sure, but they're, as you say, recent additions to this department. So I'm just wondering, do you have those? Can we get on notice the breakdown of those?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
They're in the public domain anyway.
Okay, thank you. What was the staff attrition rate for last financial year?
I'll get that information for you. I think our attrition rate generally, which has traditionally been quite high, is now moderating. I'll ask Ms Houghton, our Chief People Officer, to answer that.
Thank you. Rachel Houghton, Chief People Officer. I can give you two numbers, Senator. So for 23-24, it was 17.4%. However, as at the 31st of August, we're currently sitting at 15.3%.
How much? Sorry, 7.
For the last financial year, 17.4%.
Right.
As at the 31st of August, though, 15.3%.
Is that over a 12-month period then, from like 12 months to the 31st of August?
That's right.
Right, okay. What was it the previous financial year? 22-23?
22-23, it was 19.6%.
Right, okay. That's, I suppose, it's good to come in. It still seems relatively high. I don't know, what's the average across the public service?
It differs by the different types of departments. So it is slightly higher than the APS average, but it is lower than many of our equivalent like policy agencies.
Like what?
So we look at, you could look at, for example, the Attorney General's Department, Prime Minister and Cabinet. You could look at...
so they're higher? Those two are higher than yours?
I couldn't comment on their numbers.
Okay.
I do think that they are publicly available, though.
So I think the point is that when you look at the whole of the public service, you'll look at entities like, say, Services Australia or Defence, where people tend to stay put for long periods of time. They're highly specialised, whereas within microeconomic policy departments like ourselves, or climate change or industry, people move around more, they have more generalist skills, and so their attrition rates are generally higher.
So I'm just trying to get a handle on, like, okay, so which ones do you compare yourselves to, and how do you rate compared to those, like specific quantitative data?
We may need to take that on notice, okay. But I would say the relevant comparators, as I've just mentioned, are industry, climate change, etc., and agriculture, etc.
Okay, well, maybe if you take on notice what you compare it to and exactly what their staff retention rates are compared to yourselves. How many people are working from home in the department at the moment?
I can give you the number of people who have both flexible work arrangements and equally those people who have home-based work arrangements. So we have 67.69% who have flexible work arrangements, which are much broader than just home-based work. That includes things like part-time work or remote working arrangements. And then we have 59.98% of the department who have a formal home-based work arrangement.
Sorry, how much was that? I just missed that.
59.98%.
Okay, right.
And they have varied days, so that doesn't mean that those people are working all the time from home. It could be 1 day up to 5 days, and it could also be an ad hoc arrangement.
Right, okay. How does that compare to the wider public service?
I don't have that data with me, Senator.
Okay, maybe could you take that on notice?
My sense would be that people are in the office 2 to 3 days a week, which is probably a little bit more frequently than the average, but we'll back that up with some proper data for you, Senator.
Senator, actually, I think I might have some data from the APSC that I could provide. So the APSC have identified through the annual APS employee census that 76% access some form of flexible work, which is broadly similar to the same number in 2023. And No, I don't have anything.
Come back to you if we can.
Well, I mean, the numbers I have in the census, there was in your staff census, 74% of your staff reported that they work from home or away from the office. Now, that's a bit higher than the formal arrangements you have, but do you not necessarily need a formal arrangement to do that?
Sorry, Senator. The APS data was 61%
Right.
who have working away from the office or working from home at least part of the time.
Okay, that accords with mine because I've got 74% for yours in the census.
Yeah.
And I know that's 13% higher than the average, so that checks out.
Sorry, no. So we've
30
got
percentage points higher.
so 61% of the APS, and our data was I think it was 59.91. So nearly identical.
But your census said 74, though.
So yeah, that would take into account a range of flexible work arrangements.
So where's the 61 from? Is that?
The 61 was the APS wide in the APS employee census.
And there's a difference here between...
So, but they're both the census then. So the comparable metric is if you're using the 61% figure from the census, presumably you need to compare it to your census, which was 74%, and you're 13 percentage points higher than that.
So the APS as a whole is 61%.
Yeah.
Our HR data systems holdings indicate 59.98% have a formal home-based work.
Sorry, can you just see what I'm saying? If you're using the APS figure from the census, and I don't know how presumably the census is a survey response, the comparable figure for your department should be from your census, presumably, not from internal HR data, which could be derived on a different basis.
So I think we're talking at cross purposes. Right. So the 61% is the APS as a whole.
But from their census, is it how do they get the 61%? Is it from the census?
Yeah.
And your figure from your census is 74%, is that right?
Our HR systems are 59.
No, I'm just sorry. Just want to confirm that the figure I've been given is that your census reported 74% of staff work from home or away from the office. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So that's 13 percentage point higher than the census for the ABS wide. So a number of state government agencies are encouraging their workforces back to the office. Is there any encouragement for people to come back into the office within the department?
We generally allow individual teams to find the right level in terms of combining the benefits of the flexibility that home working provides with the desirability of people coming together as teams to have face-to-face meetings. So we allow our divisions to find the path that works for them, and that seems to be the best way of optimising people's productivity.
Senator, it's Marie Bridger. I'm the Chief Operating Officer. It also does depend on the nature of the work that they do. So for some staff, they do need to come into the office to use particular systems, whether it be security, classification and the like. So
some staff have regulatory functions which require them to be on the ground.
Yeah. So has there been any research on the productivity question?
There's been research from a number of different sources at state government and Commonwealth level, not by our department specifically.
Yeah. Look, I'm just mindful here that your employee expenses have gone through the roof. I don't think your infrastructure is getting any better. Anyone would say that. I'm just wondering how you measure the productivity.
So when you say our employee expenses have gone through the roof, you mean that they have increased, and they've increased as a result of additional provision being made in past budgets to support increased activity by the department.
Well, I think $50 million is a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
It's year on year.
And there's a lot of policy work going on in the department.
Yeah. Well, let's say it doesn't seem to be translating to better services to people. Just moving on then. I've got some questions about the housing support program.
That's under outcome 3, and we will be answering.
Might just go to Senator McKenzie first. Yeah, just want to clarify something. Yep.
Mr Betts, can you advise what process is undertaken within the public service for secretary performance assessment?
The Secretary's performance assessment is undertaken by the Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet and the Australian Public Service Commissioner. And so your questions are best directed to them. Having been on the receiving end of 2 performance assessments during my time, my understanding is that conversations take place with ministers, that the Secretary and the Commissioner have regards to other data points like census results, and that they also undertake a thing called 270-degree feedback, which is where feedback on the performance of secretaries is sought from their peers and from people who work for them and from external stakeholders.
270 degrees. Why not 360?
Because the remaining quadrant, as again, questions for the Australian Public Service Commissioner and the Secretary of PM&C, the remaining quadrant is dealt with through the feedback that's provided by the lead minister within the portfolio.
Right, thank you. Ministers contribute through engagement with PM&C and APS Commissioner.
That's my understanding.
Right. And you've undergone two. Have you been informed of the results?
Yes.
And have your ministers been advised of the results, or would it only be the senior minister?
I don't know. That's a matter for the...
Okay, I'll follow that up.
PM&C.
Has any of your ministers discussed the results with you?
No.
And do the outcomes of this process impact on remuneration at all?
No.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
All right, yes. So, thank you, Chair. I realise the housing support program is in a different outcome, but I just wanted to make sure that these weren't relevant for corporate, because obviously once we let you go, that's it. My understanding is that $1 billion has been announced under this program. Is that correct?
I think the total is $1.5 billion, including $1 billion supplementation in the most recent.
Right. The supplementation is what I'm asking about.
So, depending on what you mean by announced, Senator, that's the total value of the program is $1.5 billion. It was originally appropriated as a $500 million program, and that was increased by an additional $1 billion.
Okay. So, how much of that $1 billion has been, the extra billion, has been provided to state and territory governments?
All of it.
So it's already been sent to them?
That's correct.
When did it get sent to them?
I have that date with me. Just give me a moment to locate it, Senator.
The funding is mediated through federal funding agreements.
It was provided to states and territories, Senator, on the 28th of June 2024.
Okay. All right. So, did they have, was there specific projects they had to deliver from that $1 billion?
So from the $1 billion that we're discussing, implementation plans are due to be agreed between the Commonwealth and jurisdictions by, in my notes I have by the 30th of September. That's obviously passed, as at the 14th of October 2024, South Australia, Western Australia, Victoria, Queensland and the ACT had submitted their implementation plans.
Just this one, South Australia, West Australia, Victoria,
Queensland and the ACT.
So, just for completeness, Senator, $1.5 billion in total, 3 streams. The first stream, where the results were announced by the Prime Minister on the 1st of July, funded 80 projects with a combined value of $49.7 million, directed to lifting planning capability across local government and states and territories, 73 local government entities and obviously 7 states. And then there is a second stream, some $450 million, which was opened on the 5th of July and closed on the 16th of August for infrastructure and amenity projects to enable housing supply. That's still on foot.
But I'm just trying to understand the rationale of handing over $1 billion without any... So just to be clear, the implementation plan's now been included for most states. What do they do? What's the implementation plan say? Do they identify particular projects?
Yes, Senator. Okay. I'll have the people who can take you through that in more detail.
I understand some of these might be for later, but I'm just trying to understand the rationale of giving $1 billion without any idea of what they're going to spend it on.
So, I don't think it's right to say we don't have any idea what they're going to spend it on. That's the purpose of the implementation plans.
What do they need the money, though? Like, if there's not a specific project, they've obviously got nothing to spend the money on. Why did they need it on the 28th of June?
Senator, I think we're moving outside the
Well, maybe the Minister can help. I mean, it's maybe more a question for the Minister. Why did the government decide, like borrowing this money, why are we putting this on our debt to give to state governments?
Well, obviously...
Like, it's real cash, right? We've handed over the cash, just to be clear.
Yes.
They've got $1 billion extra in their bank accounts.
Transfer between treasuries.
Yeah.
Obviously,
That's already occurred.
That's right.
Yeah, 28th of June.
28th of June.
Yeah.
Obviously, with what we're dealing with the housing shortage around the country, Senator Canvan, this was one of the measures that the government took. I was in the Carpentaria Shire, who were some of the beneficiaries of this, to help develop a housing estate there. So they were well received by the Mayor, Bowden up there as well. So I think it is something that is going to speed up the ability of councils to develop housing projects.
Has the Carpentaria Shire got any money from this today?
They've announced as part of the package.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to. Your answer doesn't quite explain why you'd transfer the money to them before they get it, before they need it. There's obviously carrying costs of money, there's an interest cost of money, there's an opportunity cost of money that now you've exposed federal taxpayers to for no benefit. Why, we didn't have to give them this money 3 months ago. We haven't answered why.
Well, obviously the department are going through the process around how that's administered, but I'm confident that this will make a difference to speed up housing approvals in this country.
It's 5 months ago, actually, I should say. It's November now. Time's flying. Yeah, you haven't given a very strong rationale for why we have to give them this money. Apparently the department's website says you're currently assessing applications. Is that? Do I need to ask that question to outcome 3?
So
I suppose I wanted. Why I asked this here because I thought some of the money questions might be more relevant.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And what I was going to say before, Senator, is that there will be elements of this question that may be better addressed to the Treasury because of the nature of that $1 billion transfer and the fact that it was agreed through a National Cabinet process. Mm-hmm. The applications that are currently being assessed are in that second stream that the Secretary outlined before, the $450 million stream, which was open to applications earlier in the financial year, and we are currently assessing those.
Can I just ask a question about the $1 billion that's left? The department's bottom line, Treasury, to sit in a state government's bank account. What is the cost of that over 5 months, given that we haven't got all the implementation plans in, let alone agreed
Senator,
projects?
that would be a question for the Treasury. These are transfers between Treasuries.
They don't go through our books.
Right. Okay. Can I just clarify that for this program, is there any funding beyond then last financial year? Have you handed over all the money?
The split of funding for the program as it's appropriated is $1.05 billion in 23-24.
Yep.
Which is essentially that transfer plus the planning stream, and $450 million in this financial year, which is that second stream that's currently being assessed.
Okay. So the $450 million, will that be provided only after particular projects have been identified?
So that stream operates on a different basis.
Yeah,
that was open for application from both states and local governments.
So is there any reason that one is being done on a planned process through an application process, and then the $1 billion just handed over? I still just can't understand why we handed $1 billion over for no return.
Is this normal? Is this just what your government does, Minister?
Well, I think
shovels money to states and gets their plans later?
Well, we're obviously dealing with a challenging circumstance in housing. We're committed to ensuring that we're delivering more housing and the infrastructure that's required. I visit a lot of councils around the country, and they're all screaming out for more money to help develop projects like this that these programs are going to assist. So I think it's a good outcome, and I certainly see that it'll be welcomed by councils and states.
So, Minister, if you, like me and others, have travelled around talking to local councils, are they saying the reason that they can't open up more housing blocks is because they haven't got a swing set for the housing development over the sewerage? The swing set over the sewerage, because I'm hearing they need the sewerage and the power supply and the water and the telecommunications. Your programs go to funding swing sets, community halls,
Well, that's not
etc.
true. That's not
prior to, and we'll get to that in the other outcome, but the Minister just made claim that he's listening to local councils. Are they wanting swing sets to open these blocks up or sewerage?
Well, I'm sure they're wanting all sorts of support, and that's what the government's providing, Senator Mackenzie.
But to be clear, Senator, the housing support program pays for that underlying enabling infrastructure.
I was talking also about the community enabling infrastructure piece, the $450 million that you've got there. So just to confirm, South Australia, Victoria, Queensland, WA, ACT have signed up and have an implementation plan. Is that correct,
So,
Mr McKay?
as at the 14th of October, those were the jurisdictions who had provided their implementation plans to the Commonwealth.
And what's the next step of the process? So the implementation plan has been, is there any sort of milestones within that, or you've given over all the money?
So the implementation plans need to be agreed by the Commonwealth Minister.
Yeah. But they've already got the money.
The money was transferred between treasuries. That's right. What I don't have is whether any others have been provided between the 14th of October and today.
No, I appreciate that.
But I'll have the people here this afternoon who can clarify
That's fine.
that.
I'm wanting to understand the process, the point of an implementation plan needing to be agreed if the money's already sitting in the state government's bank account. Can't they just then... What mechanism does the Commonwealth have to ensure that $1 billion in a state government's bank account is only spent on implementation plan X?
On the basis that the terms of the transfer require an implementation plan to be agreed between the relevant jurisdiction and the Commonwealth, and that's part of the funding schedules that have been signed.
Does it also have milestone payments? It can't.
I don't have that detail in front of me, Senator.
No.
So,
it's sort of a rhetorical question, Mr McKay, because you've told me the government's already given the states $1 billion. So milestone payments don't exist, do they? Mr McKay, milestone payments do not exist, do they?
I don't have that level of detail in front of me.
Secretary, do milestones payments exist given the $1 billion is sitting in state and territory government bank accounts?
We'll get detail on how all of that works this afternoon.
Ms Bridger, no, this is a corporate question, Secretary. I'm not interested in the details.
It's a federal funding agreement entered into through our Commonwealth Treasury, not through our department.
So, in terms of negotiating this, do milestone payments exist or not?
Senator, it's not...
And the fact that none of you can answer that question, like it's quite a simple answer.
Yeah, it's not my understanding that there are milestone payments in the way that we might for a grant, where a particular milestone is reported and then funds are transferred. Nonetheless, the implementation plans do need to be agreed between both governments.
Yes.
Can I just again, if these need to go out, come through, let me know. I just want to confirm what the administrative costs are. Do you have those?
I do.
Yep. Okay.
So the total program cost, the total program appropriation of administered funding is $1.5 billion, as we discussed. The administrative costs over 2 years are $7.4 million.
Okay. And how many staff? Do you have an allocation of staff to this program?
That would be made up within that $7.4 million.
You don't have FTE equivalent?
I've only got the dollar figure in front of me.
Maybe if you could take on notes if you've got that
I'll see if we can
division
this afternoon.
Great, thank you very much. Going back to where Senator Mackenzie was going, is there, under these implementation agreements or any other agreement you've got with the state in regard to this money, or a state or territory government, is there any way to claw back the funding if they don't meet the commitments under the plan?
Senator, I think that is a question better handled under Outcome 3. I don't have a copy of the schedules with me.
Okay. All right, we'll take it up later. It'll probably flick me, but this is the point, I suppose the key point here is a lot of what this project seems to be funding is normal local government infrastructure, the kind of things that governments deliver day to day all the time, and Senator Mackenzie said parks, but also sewerage, everything, whatever it can fund. How are we going to know that they're doing more of it You see, I mean, how do we know that $1 billion is delivering additional infrastructure apart from just the state government going, whoopee, here's $1 billion. Now I can just offset the costs of what I was doing anyway. How do we know that?
I think that is better handled with the team here in Outcome 3 this afternoon.
Right. It seems a very, very relevant question. Okay, which we will come back to.
Ms Bridger, what mechanisms have been included in the contract to actually claw back funds if a state doesn't meet its obligations under the agreed implementation plan?
It's a federal funding agreement. It's a question for the Commonwealth Treasury.
You don't know?
I've answered your question.
I suppose the other point here, just while we've got your secretary and others, and we might come back to this later, but presumably some elements of this are a question for your department to design. So was this issue, it's obviously a common issue with government funding, have you designed anything in the program to mitigate the problem of our money not providing additionality?
These are entirely legitimate questions which we will answer this afternoon when we have the relevant subject matter experts.
Yes, I think they're very relevant. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Do you want to move on? I think we've got to look. Sorry? All right, I might move on then.
I can go.
Okay, you go, Senator McKenzie.
I just want to go to professional development speakers. In answer to a QAN from February additional estimates, we had four speakers who'd been contracted for professional development training between the 1st of July and February, being Michelle Shepherd for $2,500, Celia Pacola, is that? Yep. For $15,500, Elena Dokic at nearly $11,000, and Mimi Kwa at $8,400 odd. So how much did the department spend in total on the provision of professional development training for staff from external providers?
Over what period?
23-24.
Okay.
Senator, can you repeat your questions just so I've got it?
So how much did you spend in 23-24 on external providers of staff development training?
Okay, I don't have that data. I do have some information about speakers that I can provide, if that's helpful.
No, I just wanted external providers. How long would it take you to get that information?
I'll check with the team.
We'll get it for you as soon as we can.
Yeah.
Yep, all right. It's my understanding that you did, in answer to one of my quans, $15,500 for an actor from the Utopia program to give advice to staff in the department. Is that correct?
Celia Pacola has a long career in acting, including in the Utopia program, yes. The event that she spoke at on the 4th of October 2023 was part of Mental Health Week. It was, and the talk was entitled, was related to mental health and well-being. In recent times, Celia Pacola has done a very well-regarded documentary on SBS called The Truth About Anxiety. And she spoke quite powerfully about her own experiences with anxiety and depression. 213 of our staff attended either in person or virtually that event, and it was a very successful component of Mental Health Week. So
aside from that very powerful lived experience being shared with your staff for Mental Health Week, was there any other advice that she gave? I mean, I know she's, the inspiration behind the High Speed Rail Authority, but was there any other sort of infrastructure delivery advice that she gave, or was it really about her lived experience with mental health and anxiety?
That was the purpose of the whole talk, yeah.
Why was she selected?
High profile and therefore likely to attract interest from our staff, but also somebody in a position, a publicly recognised figure who has been very open about her experiences with anxiety and depression. And that is a powerful thing for people who may be struggling with that themselves, or may have, for instance, teenage children who are going through that kind of trauma. When public figures are prepared to speak out about that kind of thing, and I know a number of politicians who've very courageously spoken out about it, it has a positive reinforcing effect on our own people as they struggle with equivalent issues.
Yeah. And Yelena Dokic, why was she selected and what advice did she provide?
So Elena Dokic is obviously a very high-profile Australian who's achieved amazing things in the world of tennis. But at the same time, and she's written about this in 2 autobiographies, she is a victim of domestic and family violence. She was her father was in an abusive relationship with her, and again she spoke very movingly about those experiences and where she had turned for support during the most difficult of times.
And are there any plans for Mental Health Week coming up this financial year?
Well, I'm not sure when. I think Mental Health Week took place a few weeks ago. We had a panel of internal speakers talking about their own experiences. But mental health and wellbeing is something which we try to talk about a lot in the department. We know that 1 in 5 Australians at some point in their life experience anxiety or depression. Costs our economy about $11 billion conservatively assessed. And we have moral as well as legal obligations to provide a psychologically safe workplace for people.
And the internal panel of speakers, they're internal to the department?
Correct, yeah.
Yep.
It may have been an external as well as a facilitator, but we had some senior people within the department who talked about their own personal experience and those of their family members.
So just who external did you have?
Yep, I can add that. So it was Hayley Lewis, and it was for Mental Health Month and WorkSafe Month. And she discussed her experience with mental health and her role as a mental health ambassador for the Queensland Government that allowed her to pioneer new codes for mental health in the workplace.
Yep, and anybody else?
No.
And how much did we pay Ms Lewis?
That was $8,554.
Okay, thank you. And I'm assuming the internal panel members were there pro bono?
Correct.
And how many staff attended this particular event?
The one with Hayley Lewis was 214.
Great. So 1 up on last year. Good. Your staff are very good at attending these events. Thank you very much.
Just while you're swapping between the two, Senator Rennick does have... This is corporate matters. Senator
happy.
So you good to go?
Yeah.
Okay, Senator Rennick.
Yeah, guys, my question is regarding the funding for the $100 million given for Evoca Drive. I'm just curious to know what the process is for giving out federal grants on non-federal highways.
No.
So that's outcome 1, infrastructure.
Yeah. We're not there yet, Senator Rennick.
Okay, so what time's that?
Sorry?
What time's that?
It was to be 9:45, but I'm in the hands of the opposition senators. You might have an idea. Would we get there before Smoko, Senator Canavan, or should Senator Rennick come back after?
Sorry, I've just got one
Till
more.
we get to a corporate.
Oh, no, I've got... Yeah.
Once we finish
We've
corporate.
got more.
No, that's fine. I can get them on notice.
Sorry? Sorry, I wasn't listening to the
No, sorry, Senator Rennick's questions for outcome 1.
Yeah, I've just got one more.
Have you got many more from
No,
corporate?
just one.
Hang around, Senator Rennick. Thanks, Senator Canavan.
All right. Look, I just wanted to spend the news a bit lately, but Mr Betts, have you got membership of the Qantas Chairman's Lounge?
Yes, I've been a member for 15 years.
Right. Virgin Beyond Lounge?
No, I don't think so. I'm a member of the standard Virgin Lounge.
Okay, but not the Beyond one. And just want to check that from within the department's sort of reporting of this, that access is considered a gift or a benefit?
Yes.
Okay. And can I just check, do all your deputy secretaries have membership of the Chairman's Lounge?
Yes, they do.
And I presume you might need to check on the Virgin Beyond Lounge then?
Yeah.
I'll take them on notice, but they all have Chairman's Lounge access?
Yes, and in a couple of cases, and including mine, partners have membership as well.
Okay. I'm just wanted to read out, there's apparently an accountable authority instruction. Are you familiar with that? So some sections on here in that are relevant, if you just bear with me to my question. So item 2 says, with respect to the receipt or acceptance of gifts and or benefits, officials must not ask for or encourage the giving of gifts or other benefits themselves, the family, associates or other officials. And at C it says, they must not accept a gift or a benefit that influences or could be perceived to influence their decision or action on a particular matter, except in accordance with this AAI. For the purposes of clarity, this acceptance of any gift or benefit, except in accordance with instructions within this AAI, should be viewed as potentially creating a perception of influence. I just want to clarify that you don't believe any of those memberships do create a perception of influence over the department?
I don't, and I think it's fair to say my predecessors in this role over a number of decades have also had lounge membership. I do think it's a legitimate question to ask around the management of any perceived conflict of interest. You've accurately described the accountable authority instruction in relation to gifts and benefits, and there are also processes for the declaration of any interests. I'm required as Secretary to write to the Minister documenting those interests, and that includes the membership of the Chairman's Lounge for myself and for my wife. And I'm happy to talk about the management of any perceived conflict of interest, including the fact that regulatory functions are not undertaken in relation to airlines at Secretary or Deputy Secretary level within our department, within our portfolio.
But are you suggesting if there is government officials that do undertake regulatory functions in regards to Qantas or Virgin, that being a member of these lounges would be then a perception of a conflict of interest?
There may be a perception, but they would need to deal with that through management plans.
Okay.
So, for instance, Civil Aviation Safety Authority, ACCC, Home Affairs, there are memberships of the Chairman's Lounge there. I imagine that there are management plans in place to deal with those to avoid any actual conflict of interest.
But you're not yourself familiar with those plans? Some of those agencies fall under your department, but you're not familiar with them?
No.
Would the Minister have to be assured that those perceived conflicts of interest, particularly with CASA, with Air Services Australia in particular, assure herself that they... who assures, if you're not assuring, around the management of perceived or actual conflict of interest of those agencies, who would?
I'd have to take that on notice. They operate independently of the department and in some cases in other portfolios. Certainly as far as my own conflicts of interest, I make representations to the Minister to document what those interests are and to describe how they'll be managed.
And do your staff, who also hold Chairman's Lounge memberships, have to report directly to the Minister, or are they through you?
They all declare it in terms of gifts and hospitality, and whether there is a risk of a perception of a conflict of interest, there are equivalent processes in place, but to me as accountable authority.
Okay. Look, I want to table, Chair, if possible, an FOI document, 24112. In this document, it's an email chain that's titled Upgrade to Chairman's Lounge Membership for David Mackay. And in that email, and I might just need to quote from it, to the staff before I hand over. These are from unnamed people. They're emails. They're blanked out. But it is an email from the Executive Assistant to David Mackay, who sends an email to a Qantas person and says, and I quote, "It was lovely to meet you yesterday. As discussed, David Mackay is a newly appointed Deputy Secretary, and I understand he's now entitled to be upgraded to Chairman's Lounge membership." And some further details. I just wonder, is that in accordance with what I've just described earlier, that there should be no solicitation of gifts? We've got here a direct email under FOI of...
I haven't seen that email. Okay. I would only say that it's standard practice for Qantas to offer Chairman's Lounge membership to Deputy Secretaries in all Australian government departments, but I can't speak to what a junior staff member may have said in an email.
Sure. Well, maybe if you could just take on notice and reflect on that. Obviously, I'm not expecting you to have seen that yourself, and don't expect you to make any judgments on it without having a proper look at it.
I've just got one other question. Secretary, when you said that there's plans to deal with the perceived conflict of interest of a Chairman's Lounge membership for yourself and obviously your senior officials, and that no one... the regulatory functions within the department are elsewhere and therefore not subject. But is there not a power imbalance between the people who hold the Chairman's Lounge membership and those within the department who are charged with the regulation of the aviation, the regulatory functions of the department. It's sort of my question. I'd just like you to unpack that for me, how you manage that.
So we manage it through formal and structured delegations, which are transparent. So the particularly relevant legislation or regulations relate to noise and airport capacity regulation, particularly in relation to Sydney Airport, and the Air Navigation Act. There's also a piece of legislation in relation to the Airports Act, which is the only delegation which is held at Deputy Secretary level, and that's a very tightly circumscribed one. So it's managed through formal processes of delegation. And obviously when it comes to the generation of policy or policy advice, that is advice, and any decision-making is for the Minister or for Cabinet or ultimately for the Parliament. So
you're confident that your staff, yourself and your staff's holding of a chairman's membership has not influenced their advice to government or their views around protecting Qantas's market share in our aviation sector?
Yes, I am confident of that. And to the extent that there were any risk of that, the measures that we've taken in terms of delegations go partly way towards mitigating that. But in extremis, there would also be channels through which our own staff could report any concerns about any conflict of interest not being appropriately managed, public interest disclosures through to the Australian Public Service Commission in relation to Code of Conduct and ultimately to the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Now, those are obviously fallbacks, but we think we've put processes in place to make sure that there is transparency here and that there are controls through formal delegations.
And that would explain why your department recommended to Catherine King to approve Qatar's application for additional flights last year, because your officials did not have a conflict. That's why the advice to Catherine King was to approve Qatar's additional flights last year that the Minister herself chose to reject. It may go in way to explain how you've been able to manage the conflicts internally whilst the government may not have been able to. I don't expect you to answer that.
I was going to say, it sounds like one of your rhetorical questions.
Yes, I'll consider that a comment.
Sorry, Chair, just one other very quick element on this. Just going back to that issue involving Mr Mackay, I've also just like to table there is here the document that approves the gift from you, Mr Betts. That's dated the 7th of June 2023. The email at a table you'll see was from the 17th of January 2023. Do you have a particular time frame upon which gifts should be declared? And I'm not. That's the only correspondence I have, so I'm not sure when Mr Mackay sent it to you or exactly. Is there a particular time frame through which gifts
minimum, these things should be dealt with on an annual basis.
Okay, annual. All right. Okay. All right. Thank you. If you're happy with that, thanks. Thanks, Chair. Thank you. Okay, we're done with corporate.